Okay.
It will take 10 seconds.
Sure. Thank you. And there's a delay, isn't there? 8 seconds, 10 seconds?
10 to 15 seconds.
10, yeah. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for sending in your earlier questions. I'll take those first, and then perhaps we can move to our live conversation. First of all, the 3 questions from, if I'm not mistaken, Rishi Mohan. 3 very good questions. I'll read out the questions first, and then try and discuss them to clarify these points for you. First of all, what do we mean by the word critique? Do we have to take the positives as well as the negative perspectives under a critique of something? That's the first question. What does critique mean? The second question, why is it important to understand ideology? What we observe today, this is part of the question, is that hardly any ideology sustains its own separate existence. Every ideology seems to have got mixed up with each other. That's the second question. The third question, what's the viewpoint of Pico on multiculturalism? Why do we take multiculturalism as an ideological space and not as an ideology? Okay, I'll try and answer these briefly, turn by turn. First of all, what do we mean by the word critique? Well, it's a term used in English-speaking humanities today. It's derived from French, where critiquer, if I'm not mistaken, carries the connotation of to evaluate something, evaluating something. And therefore, a critique, broadly is understood in contemporary humanities and social sciences to mean an informed, clear evaluation of something. Now, these may be complex phenomena that we're evaluating. Developments in the arts, developments in commercial cinema, developments in music, developments in politics, developments in the shape of families or family life, and so on. Or in relations between men and women in other areas of life, relations between employers and their employees. Now, a critique is therefore an informed evaluation, and that means we need to know the thinking behind the kinds of things that are done. We need to know their history, their sociological and possibly legal and political context. We also need to know the consequences, and we need examples. Now, the examples may show aspects of these of the phenomenon in good or bad light. We need to develop an informed, articulated account. I'll give you an example. Karl Marx has provided what may well be the greatest critique of commodity production of capitalism that has ever been written. People have said that. I'm not the first one to say it. But he is very, very respectful and admiring of capitalism. He's very clear that it's liberated immense human creative energy and that it has, in effect, broken the hold, certainly in industrial countries, the hold on hundreds of millions of people of feudal traditional authority and of long institutionalized religions. So Marx is well aware of the complexity of capitalism, but his analysis leads him to conclude that ultimately it tunnels and forces human creativity into only the directions which serve to generate surplus value, or in everyday terms, profit for the controllers of capital. But the critique is very thorough, very comprehensive, and in many places very respectful of and very admiring of capitalism. So that's the kind of thing that the term critique means, and I hope that will clarify the point for you. Secondly, why is it important to understand political ideology? Very good question. I presume you've seen the introductory video of about 4 minutes that I did for this NPTEL Ideologies course. Can I suggest you have a look at that? But I will, of course, try and answer your question here, of course, certainly. Well, almost every major policy, major action in public life, often in private life, almost every major commercial action, policy, major laws, aspects of constitutions of states, all in their own way express and embody ideologies of various kinds. These are not often done explicitly, but they underlie a great many policies. For example, in our previous tutorial, I mentioned an article on the front page of the New Indian Express on the 31st of January 2020, which, if I remember rightly, was a headline, front page item, which said that, if I'm not mistaken, the Reserve Bank of India was going to instruct, or had instructed, public sector banks, that is 3/4 of the banks in India, to lend money to businesses and enterprises on a much larger scale. And I think the implication was recognized that some of these loans would end up not being repaid. But it seemed that, I'll give you the ideological element here, or try and identify it here, it seemed that, given the condition of the economy, left to itself, people were not going to borrow money to expand or develop businesses. Goes with an economic slowdown. We saw this with the work of Maynard Keynes in liberalism. And therefore, the RBI, presumably with the approval of the finance minister and possibly the whole cabinet, we don't know, had decided on making money more readily available as a stimulus to the economy. This, of course, goes back to Roosevelt's New Deal and to Maynard Keynes's concern to get an economy moving again, and they had their own different reasons for it. There were certain convergences of reasons. But does that mean then that a central government, which is apparently committed to neoliberalism, is relying on modern liberal, Keynesian, social democratic policies, possibly not very different from those of the 1950s, to get sectors of the Indian economy moving again? That's why ideology matters, right? So a knowledge of ideology helps us to see what's being done, what ideas it might express, and to hold our elected representatives to account. You might want to ask those in office, have you abandoned neoliberalism, or are you abandoning it, or how do you reconcile neoliberal commitments with this apparently Keynesian or New Deal type policy? That's one reason why it's valuable to study ideologies, extremely valuable. Secondly, well, the world is complex. We will find ideologies coexisting. We will almost never find anywhere a single ideology as the sole informing principle of any state system or society or whatever. But we need to be able to identify what ideologies are expressed or which ideologies underlie, say, the shape of our family, in particular societies, or changes in law and policy. For example, plenty of conservatives have thought that the contraceptive pill would undermine the traditional family by making it possible for people to engage in sexual relations without fear of conception. Now, even the idea of women's controlling their own fertility, or people in general controlling their own fertility, could be seen by moral and social conservatives or by others as undermining certain conceptions of the family. Now, those conceptions of the family are expressed in particular ideologies. There's a wide range of them. We may well find that plenty of people are perfectly happy to engage in contraceptive practice, to decide when they will have children, when they will reproduce, and yet to lead very traditional lives at home or in the workplace. Now, we can see there that many ideologies might overlap and even have some kind of interaction in our everyday lives. Today's societies are complex, and we're complex beings, but a knowledge of ideologies enables us to see, and perhaps even to argue for, changes in practice with the background of what ideologies might imply. Right? So I hope that addresses your question. I hope it does. Come back if it doesn't. Do please come back. And yes, we will see complex mixtures of ideology. For example, the Reagan administration had the resignation of David Stockman in the early 80s, who called Ronald Reagan, John Maynard Reagan, because he was throwing money at things. It's often been said, for example, by people like Keith Birch, a professor of political economy, that we're not in a neoliberal age at all, but that the state has redirected vast amounts of public funding to things that modern liberals, Keynesians, wouldn't necessarily recognize as that deserving. Things like, who keeps giant defense corporations going? Governments buying huge amounts of equipment and huge amounts of very, very expensive equipment. Is that Keynesian or is it not? Or is it neoliberal? We don't know, right? Or we might not know that easily. And that's why we need to understand ideology, so as to be able to see what kinds of ideas are being expressed. Yeah? In policy, or shown in policy, or in legislation, or in the ways we conduct our everyday lives. I hope that helps. Your third question, Rishi, on Pico Parekh. Yes, I simply drew one point from a longish article by Pico Parekh written in, I think, 1988 or 89, in the context of the very fierce and very angry controversy around the publication of Salman Rushdie's book, Satanic Verses. A great many people rushed to claim that cultures had been grossly insulted by passages in the book and so on. Nothing unusual about that. We've seen that with Wendy Doniger's book, The Hindus and Alternative History, and so on. And it happens in a great many parts of the world. It happened over the Monty Python film Life of Brian, which some of you may have seen, Monty Python's Life of Brian. Now, Parekh's point is that cultures are not so easily defined as we might think they are. All cultures have encountered other cultures. There's Roman coin found on the southeast coast of India. And people learn languages, exchange cultures, habits, food habits, faiths, elements of faiths. Many of these, when we look at their inheritances, tend to have much more complex inheritances than we realize at first sight. And Parekh's point was that all cultures are continuing conversations. I took that to mean that cultures are continuing conversations within themselves and with one another. Think of how we might amend and alter even long-established traditional practices in the light of the requirements and demands of modern urban society. We do this. We often do it without wrecking cultures, without destroying them or any such thing. We adapt. We adapt in the light of different considerations, and these may be derived from many different cultures. That's the kind of thing that Parekh means when he talks about cultures being continuing conversations. The second part of your question, you can look up the Parekh article. I think it's freely accessible on the net. It dates from like 1988 or 89. It might have been, it was in one of the British news magazines or heavyweight news analysis type outlets. I can't remember the exact one, I'm afraid. Now, multiculturalism, is it? Why do we take it as an ideological space and not as an ideology in its own right? I made the comment really to indicate that multiculturalism can take very different forms. In practice, it does so. In fact, it does so. And that we don't need to go into this in very great detail, but I was trying to indicate that multiculturalism might be quite difficult to sustain the idea of it as a fully worked out ideology. Possibly because we might have many different forms of multiculturalism, some which claim primordial cultures which have to be retrieved and recovered, and that would have parallels with fascism and fundamentalism. Multiculturalism would also have to, what would be our position in relation to, say, an extreme capitalist multiculturalism in which people might share a culture with us, or we might share an intercultural inheritance with them, but they happen to be very wealthy capitalists and we end up working for them and they make lots of profits out of our surplus labor and so on. So, that was, I didn't intend the point to be enormously significant. What I was trying to indicate was that multiculturalism is a very complex phenomenon and may not be that easily articulable as a single ideology. If it were that, it would probably be a form of liberalism. You know, everyone's got their culture and they can all have their cultural space and all the rest of it, but that run into all the same problems as the rest of liberalism shows. And I hope that addresses your concern. If it doesn't, please come back and we talk about it further. Okay, some of you are here and you've addressed questions to me. You have, Anshuman, you've asked a question here. And your question is, I still have a question. How did he said the BJP is a fascist government? I don't recall saying that. And you've said, don't get me wrong, I'm not pro-BJP. Well, you may well be so. I'm happy to talk and listen. My point is this. If we think a particular government is fascist, we need to be able to specify precisely what is fascist about what it does. Major legislation and policy, look for the evidence. We shall probably find plenty in respect of the current BJP government and the links between the Hindu right, leaders of the Hindu right, and Italian fascism and the Nazis in the 1930s, 20s and 30s are thoroughly well documented. The question then is, has India got a government that is fascist? Well, there's plenty of evidence against it as well. Right? We might want to criticize a lot of the legislation, a lot of the policy, and a lot of the thinking behind the policy, and we can do that if we are familiar with the ideology of fascism. But we might also find that, remember, for example, remember, the BJP still have to stand for election, and the public decide whether they hold office or not in any state or in the Lok Sabha in Delhi. Similarly, India is a republic with a republican constitution and a Supreme Court which has a very great deal of authority and which, for example, is currently considering the constitutionality of the Citizenship Amendment Act. Now, the decision of the Supreme Court will be binding throughout all the territories of the Republic of India. In other words, the Supreme Court very much still exists and very much still has the authority to declare an act of parliament unconstitutional. Now, in weighing up whether the current government is fascist or not, that's the kind of evidence we would have to take into account. I'll give you an example. I don't know if the review is going to appear in print immediately. I haven't yet sent it off. But I've been reviewing a book in which the current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, is quoted, quite correctly quoted, but what he has said could easily have been said by Jawaharlal Nehru in the 1950s about a major aspect of Indian policy. Now, does that make either of them a fascist? Our task is to see if it does. That particular remark, I can offer you this, doesn't. But the point is, for us to be clear what is and is not fascist, and to see what it is in a particular government's policy or attitude that may or may not be fascist. In other words, we need an informed evaluation of those who claim to represent the electorate and are put in representative positions by the electorate. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Okay, Ajinka Gaikwad, good afternoon. You said, how do I view the development of a Bristol School of Multiculturalism led by Tariq Maudud and others? I don't know, this is the first time I've ever heard anyone mention a Bristol School of Multiculturalism. They do take related but different positions, and I'm not that familiar with some of the recent writings. I knew Tariq Maudud for a time, I haven't had any contact with him for quite a while, for several years. But well, this kind of term is a Bristol school, needs to be handled with care. We would probably find some similarities in arguments and in positions that Parekh and Tariq Maudud and some of the others argue. We may also find significant differences. And that is part and parcel of developing an informed and articulated sense of the issues that multiculturalism involves and of the ways those issues have been addressed by different researchers. Remember also that Parekh was, I think, deputy chair of the former body, which was called the Commission for Racial Equality. So a very eminent figure in political life as well as as well as in academic life. And so we need to develop an informed sense of what is said, the kinds of things that are argued by. I think Tariq Maudud was at Bristol for some time. I don't know if he's still there, but he certainly there for some time, and had a number of good students and colleagues who are working in similar areas. So if there is a Bristol school, by all means, please identify it, but identify the specific arguments, and you'll probably find that they're not necessarily all the same, and they may involve different conceptions, both of culture, conceptions of culture, conceptions of society, and so on. But thanks for the term. I'll go and look it up, and I wish you well with your exploration of whether there is or isn't a Bristol school of multiculturalism. The arguments and issues need addressing, but to talk of a single school doing a particular thing could be misleading. Try and look at the specific arguments and the specific publications. You'll find them, I presume, I think relatively easily on the net. Yeah. Okay, Mridul Pratap Singh Chauhan. Good afternoon. Can different ideologies in an extended time period be classified as similar? Yes, if the ideas are similar. There's nothing new about feminism, and I've said this in the lectures. There's nothing new about Republican thinking. We inherit it in significantly modified and importantly modified form from Aristotle. Now, Aristotle hasn't got all the answers, certainly, and there are plenty of problems there. But yes, we can certainly identify similarities, but we have to be specific what the similarities are. We have to be specific about them, we have to be specific about the modifications and changes and the reasons for those. But yes, we certainly can, otherwise it would be too tempting to claim that every new ideology is some sort of, I use a highly pejorative term, some sort of year zero invention of a new mode of human being, and that itself, you'll no doubt realize, has got uncomfortable connotations of fascism or religious fundamentalism in a sort of cultish sense. So yes, we certainly can, but we can identify similarities in ideologies which have survived for a very long time, but we need to be clear about what those ideologies involved, how they've adapted, and whether perhaps they've been abandoned. It's been said about the British Conservative Party, which is the party of government at the moment, that it bears little or no relation to its previous incarnations or avatars, even from perhaps 8 or 10 years ago, perhaps as recently as that. And we need to look at the reasons that has been said about the kinds of policies, the kinds of rhetoric, the kind of language, the kinds of people, and the kind of laws that in the current government, the British government, is passing. So yes, we certainly can, but we need to be specific about the particular policies, the particular ideas, and their particular historical location. We'll be able to identify significant continuities and discontinuities, right? I hope that helps. Okay, Jatin Khatri. Historically, in early civilizations, have humans been socialist or capitalist? My answer is, what do you think? Think about what's involved in capitalism. Remember Marx and commodity production, where production is specifically for exchange and is not just the exchange of things of which we may have a surplus, right? Marx identifies the significant transition as taking place in the Middle Ages and the late Middle Ages, to the point where by about 1750 production was starting to be primarily for exchange, and that is typical of modern capitalism. That may have changed even in the last 20 or 30 years, but that's another issue. You'll find reference to that in the chapter on Marx in the book. Were we socialist? Well, it's possible that hunter-gatherer societies, very small hunter-gatherer societies from prehistory, and I'm being very speculative here, we do need to be very careful about assuming that humans have always been just hunter-gatherers. It's possible that hunter-gatherer societies conducted their lives in ways that we might today recognize as communal in the sense of shared living, precisely for survival. And life in those days was, well, hard, nasty, and dangerous. And we were always at risk of attack, either by other tribes or by other groups of humans or by wild animals. Survival itself was an enormous achievement. We can just switch the air conditioning on, or whatever it happens to be. But I don't mean to be flippant. Yes, it is possible that it has been so suggested, and you could read some of the anthropological literature on this, that settlement for agriculture is what created the deep and rigid, for example, the deep and rigid and apparently unyielding divisions of labor between men and women that is such a familiar aspect of our lives today. It could be that hunter-gatherer societies were much less hierarchical than the societies we have today. So your question is a good one, but there may be no easy answer to the question whether socialist or capitalist. Think about what your terms socialism and capitalism mean, and then think about societies in different periods of history and whether these could be characterized in the light of your understandings of socialism or capitalism. I hope that helps. Yeah, Jatin again, Marx has said that capitalism leads to its own doom. I'm afraid he doesn't do that. He never says that. You may have read the book. I strongly recommend you read the chapter on Marx, or if you've seen the lectures, I've actually been reviewing the transcripts. Been doing them over the last 2 or 3 days, and they will go up on the website. Marx never actually says capitalism will inevitably collapse. If I'm not mistaken, Friedrich Engels says that at some point, but Marx never does. What Marx does say is that in the everyday course of our activities, our reasoning evaluations of our everyday activities, we change the ways we do things, we change and develop the instruments we use to do the things we do, and that over longer periods, the productive systems in which we live, in which we conduct our activities, undergo systematic transformations precisely because of these everyday changes. Very occasionally we do get very significant changes, sometimes as a result of technological innovations or technical innovations. But what Marx is saying, in effect, is that every society contains the logic of its own transformation. And the everyday things we do, changes we make, do lead to huge transformations to the point where societies are often unrecognizable from the kinds of things they were many years earlier. Even 40, 50 years can be enough. Marx never says capitalism will collapse inevitably. He never actually says that. He is alert to the ways in which, even in his own time, capitalism is already transforming. The single owner family was being replaced by joint stock companies where people would raise loans in the expectation of future profits, and we're familiar with joint stock companies today. Marx already sees the development of an intermediate managerial class who are not controllers of capital on a big scale. They're very well paid and have share options and so on, but serve to manage very large corporations which no one person or family could run on their own. So do be very careful about this. Marx also anticipates the financialization of the global economy. That's something we're much more familiar with today. The downgrading and downskilling of productive activity and even a lot of other human activity. It's not implausible to think that doctors, people have seriously suggested this if I'm not mistaken, doctors, lawyers, engineers are being replaced by artificial intelligence programs. So it could be that professors of philosophy will also be replaced by AI programs, but I'd be happy to listen to the relevant AI program and chat with it or whatever. I'm not being entirely flippant. The point is that Marx is well aware of the transformations that capitalism will bring about as a result of its own internal logic. Right? And this has been well written by Gregory Kleiss, whom I've cited in the lectures and certainly will cite in the second edition of the book. I've already drafted that chapter, redrafted it. Makes it very clear that we are undergoing very significant changes in the shape of the global economy, in and through the inner logic of global capitalism. So there's no, Marx never actually says capitalism will lead to its own doom. Right, I hope that addresses your question. Varun Singh, good afternoon. Do political ideologies influence the politics of the day, or is it the political motives that drives one to adopt political ideologies to suit their motives? I'm afraid I simply don't know the answer. Have a look at particular people. There's no easy answer. Yes, quite often ideologies do influence dominant climates of the day. talking non-stop. We do live in dominant climates, and you're well aware of those. Keynesian social democracy or a New Deal outlook, the attitude of the Soviet Union within the Soviet Union and some of its satellite states almost, and so on. We do live under dominant ideologies, and they certainly have an impact on the politics of the day. It sometimes happens that the imperatives of everyday political life bring it about that major leaders do things which seem to be in direct contradiction to their stated ideologies. I mentioned David Stockman's resignation from Reagan's government. I've also mentioned the quotation that I've drawn this from a book that I'm reviewing for the Hindu. I hope they publish the review. I've drawn this quotation from Narendra Modi, which sounds like Jawaharlal Nehru in the 1950s. So we might want to ask the Prime Minister of India, isn't this a Nehruvian or a Keynesian policy or a social democratic policy? Isn't it the case? Now, I'm not saying that so as to expose a contradiction or any such thing, but we must remember that there may be no easy answer to your question. There may be a question, or it may be that some particular politicians are attracted by their temperament, or particular people are attracted by their temperament to particular ideologies. But that may show itself in the ways they're attracted. It has been said of one or two, I can think of one or two examples, where people who have been fervent socialists and often have written brilliant critiques of capitalist or even modified capitalist economies and societies have become equally fervent conservatives or neoliberals or whatever. That may be to do with the persons themselves and their own individual temperaments. Have a look at particular examples, and we may well find that policies adopted by governments who make particular ideological commitments aren't necessarily what we thought they were, but that would depend on the examples. In the process, I hope we would become much better informed about our political history, wherever we are, and our recent political history and so on. But I hope that helps you to address your question. Yes, you've also mentioned that politicians move across party lines all the time. And you're reading Animal Farm. Well, Animal Farm is a bleak, depressing allegory of the times, and some would say of our times, and perhaps all time. It's a very great work. You've read it. I'm interested to know what you make of it. But yes, politicians do move across party lines. We've seen that in the United Kingdom. We've seen it in the United States. John Connolly, for example, who was sitting in the car with President Kennedy when Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, joined the Republican Party and was a senior member of the Nixon administration. He came to India as a member of the Nixon administration in, I think, 1972 or 73. Now, yes, politicians are, in democracies, politicians are free to move across party lines. They may find that a particular party is to them no longer recognizable. We've seen it with the British Labour Party, we've seen it with the Conservative Party. Michael Heseltine, now Lord Heseltine, has, I think, gone and joined the Lib Dems, the Liberal Democrats. He finds that he can no longer recognize the Conservative Party as anything whose values and tone and tenor and character he shares. So, politicians do move. You will be aware that, is it the 52nd and 53rd Amendments to the Indian Constitution, passed in the mid-1980s? You will be aware that if sitting elected politicians change parties, they have to resign their seats. This has had unintended effects, for example, making it much easier to maintain party discipline in elected assemblies. But no doubt parties have their own internal disagreements. It's just that, as I understand it, in an elected assembly in India, if I'm not mistaken, at every level of the constitution, if somebody votes against the party line on a floor vote, they have to resign their seat and stand again. It was done for specific reasons in that context, when it was said about some states that they never knew which party was governing them from one week to the next. I'm being slightly light-hearted, possibly a little cynical about that. But those amendments were brought in then. But politicians are free to change their parties, but remember, in a democratic society, we're also free to ask them why, and to ask for good reason why they did. In various other countries, if I'm not mistaken, in the United Kingdom, politicians can change parties because there is no constitution, but the principle, which would be in the constitution if we had a written one, is that the constituents put them in, and it is they to whom politicians must answer. That's in liberal democracy or representative democracy. And so in the UK, politicians can change parties without losing their seat. In India, they can't. And we, as the public, are certainly entitled to ask them why they did. If my MP were to change parties, I'd certainly have a few questions to ask. But that's the kind of point I mean. I hope that addresses your question. Okay, Rudra Pratap Singh Chauhan. Is the impact of modern day media on human ideas and thoughts polarizing? That's not new. That feature is not new. It may be that the speed of transmission on the internet and the relative anonymity of internet discussions and possibly the space afforded by internet discussions, very short utterances and so on, means that we express ourselves also under cover of anonymity in much more hostile terms, certainly in much less well articulated terms perhaps than we might have done. There is a lot of very fine research on this. I'm sorry to have to say, to suggest you read things. There's a lot of very interesting, very fine research on polarization in the context of the contemporary electronic media and even the print media. There's work on this done, particularly in respect of very extreme newspapers from the days when the print media had bigger circulations than or bigger physical circulations than they do now. They're still read in very great numbers, but are read on the net. Try the Pew Center in the United States. They publish a lot of freely accessible research. The Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford University. Oxford University's Internet Institute, top-class research. The University of Westminster has a media studies department, and there are media studies departments at other universities all around the world which produce top-class analyses of the character and tone of media coverage. You might want to look at Media Lens, a website run by David Edwards and David Cromwell in the United Kingdom, again freely accessible. You might want to look at critics of the media. There are plenty of these. Glenn Greenwald, for example, Noam Chomsky, who with Edward Herman published a book in the late 70s, 1978 I think, called Manufacturing Consent. So do read about this. It's a fascinating area and also often a very disturbing one. Could it be that we're using the electronic media far more now to propagate hatred and poisonous bitterness far more than we could have done even 10 years ago? Do think about it. It's a fascinating area fascinating and very important question for all of us. Yeah? I hope that addresses your question. I can't answer it because there isn't an answer. It certainly does look as though much of the media do polarize, and occasionally commercial and political intentions have been reliably identified on the part of quite a lot of the corporate media, and I use that term from Edwards and Cromwell. They use it to mean even the state-run media in many countries. Okay, Varun Singh, you've come back with another question. How can we go about analysing political events, ideologies, historical or present, and extract useful insights? Well, I hope that all your thinking and all your analysis will enable you to identify, to develop your insights with the knowledge and information and background that you have as a result of your reading. Techniques and ideas, yes, I'm delighted to. There are no techniques, there are things we can do. They're not techniques or formulas. Do you read the daily press? Do you read a heavyweight newspaper? It almost doesn't matter which one. Anything reasonably serious as a newspaper will carry reasonably serious analyses. Centre pages. Yeah, I'll give you an example. The Hindu perhaps carries the most heavyweight analyses of any of the daily newspapers in English, but many of the others in any language would do so. I remember watching a sort of late evening after dinner type discussion on television in Kerala when I was staying with some friends, family friends. I didn't follow much of the language, but I was very, the quality of discussion was quite stunning. I think there was an MP, from Delhi, an MLA from Trivandrum, and someone else, Thiruvananthapuram, and someone else, and an anchor. and the discussion was intensely focused on the implications of a particular new policy that the state government of the time were proposing. I was very struck by the quality and authority and the sheer knowledge these particular people, and they were politicians, had of the issue and of their care to express informed judgments about it. They were respectful of one another, clearly very knowledgeable, and they took seriously the idea that the public should be able to share and participate in this kind of very well-informed discussion. So yes, read the heavyweight news magazines. If you're working in English, try, I just named them. It's an Outlook, try India Today, try Frontline. Read lots of them. You don't have to read a single one of them. Try the German news magazine Der Spiegel International news magazine. Try the international press, and don't expect perfection, please. But read them. You will find very good analyses on different kinds of things. Al Jazeera, for example, have an excellent website and carry heavyweight analyses by major lawyers and political economists and, very authoritative figures. If you're interested, for example, in sports, you may be interested in what the authoritative press, the reliable press, says about things like the World Anti-Doping Organization. But read about these, pay attention to a range of different sources, and you'll start to develop your own informed perspectives. Yes, it does help if we can read, I'll just give you an example. The Ideologies book that I've set for this course as a background, as background. That'll give you a background to the ideas and some examples as to practice and how things have turned out. But that'll help you, I hope certainly, to read the press with your own sense of the ideas that are involved and a capacity to evaluate the events that you see around you. I hope that helps. Yeah, hope that helps. And keep watching news, serious news and news analyses. Nowadays with the internet, we're not confined to the media in any one country. Have a look at things. Asahi Shimbun, the Japanese paper, which I used to encourage my journalism students to read. Very heavyweight, very authoritative, it's an English edition. China Daily, Chunghwa Rupao, if I remember right, this still has an English edition. Have a look at that. You'll see news items, you'll see analyses. Keep reading around them. Haaretz, the paper published in Israel. Some of them are behind paywalls, but have a look. Yeah, I hope that helps. Favorite books? Well, Varun, yes, it's very kind of you to ask what are my favorite books that I believe or think should be read by everyone, the books that really had an impact on you. I want to say almost every book I've ever read has had an impact on me, and the list is long. I no doubt it could be very much longer. And there are plenty of books I haven't read, and I'm uncomfortably aware of that. But should a book be read by everyone? I don't want to say that. Should everyone read? I'd love to say that. I don't say you should. I hope you will read, and read seriously, and the more you read around things, I hope the better you will be equipped to make your own informed judgments and argue for your judgments. Defend them with publicly authoritative reasons and so on. So I hope you will read, and depending on your interests, read background things, read historical things. Depends what you're interested in. For example, if you're interested in, I don't know, divorce law in India, for example, which may or may not be different from the law in other countries, or in the history of such legislation in other parts of the world, or, for example, law and policy on women's education, girls and women's education in different states of India. There's an enormous amount of material, and that's just one example. You might want to look, if you're interested in cricket, for example, you might want to look at the history of the abolition of the amateur-professional distinction in English cricket, right? 1962. You might want to read about, for example, how Indian cricket is negotiated, in practice has negotiated the deep stratifications of Indian society. It's if you're interested in cricket, if you're interested in that kind of issue. I'm not saying you must, right? But I hope my non-answer has helped you to see, and I would say, read. I'd love to encourage you to read, and I hope you will. And if you're interested, I'm sure you will anyway. Sanjay Sharma, yes, I'm sorry you've left the course, but I'm glad you've told me. Because of the qualitative text content. I'm really sorry to hear that. perhaps you could tell me in more detail. Would you like to email me to tell me more about that, so that I can think what might make this material more accessible to yourself? By the way, I do get points like this made by students here at IIT Madras, and I try to encourage them to stay. Obviously, if they want to leave, yes, I don't take it personally, but I'm very sorry that they do. And some have felt that they could come back to my particular courses in a later year or semester, and I always said, yes, you'll be most welcome to come back. I do hope that they would have asked for help earlier. If it's the English language that's involved, well, I'm sorry that has caused you any difficulties. I realize that this particular kind of course is not easy. We are dealing with ideas about human beings, about human nature, human action, and human association, and of what different ideologies see as human beings, as what we are deserving of, and what is right and fitting for us, and so on, and how we should conduct ourselves and organize our lives and societies. These are not at all easy ideas, and they would be difficult for anyone. They are for me. I run into them all the time, and I think, my gosh, that's a tough one. How do we address that? We're faced with new challenges and new problems all the time. What are we to make, say, of the Human Genome Project? What are we to make of the idea of designer human beings? The technology is already available for the creation of designer babies, or what have been called designer babies. Does this pose new kinds of philosophic and moral challenges for us, and significant new challenges for legislation or regulation, and so on? So I am very sorry that you left. If you would like to email me and get in touch, I would be happy to try and respond in more detail, if you would like that, and if you would like to discuss how you might want to take this course again sometime. You don't have to take the exam. The transcripts are going up. You might want to look at those. They are put in more conversational terms, and you may find them easier to read than following my spoken lectures, and that happens quite a lot. You certainly won't be alone in that. But I'm sorry you've left, and if you'd like to get in touch to discuss this in more detail, drop me a line by email. I think my email address might be on the website, but I'm not sure. If it isn't, I'll check about making it available to yourselves, to all of you. Jatin Khatri, I hope, Sanjay, that addresses your concerns, and I wish you good luck, whatever studies you take up. Sanjay, sorry, yes. Jatin, sorry, yes, I must come back to your question. How far does a thought have to go to become an ideology? Are we studying just individuals or collective behaviors? Well, we're studying ideas, and ideas are usually put forward by people. Powerful, far-reaching ideas have a great impact on anyone who encounters them. They may involve the explicit statement of a way to do things, as we find with fascism or fundamentalism. Liberalism itself has its own prescriptive elements, as we've seen. But what we will find is that great thinkers put forward ideas that have very great reach and impact precisely because they're great thinkers. Powerful ideas, we've met them in sciences. Think of how the idea of gravitation or the germ theory of disease have transformed our lives. What is it that makes a thought an ideology? Well, I've selected the ideologies for this course precisely because they express or shape major conceptions of the organization of human life. They are of different kinds, and that's why we've looked at 12 ideologies. I originally left out nationalism, but the publishers wanted a chapter included in the textbook. And so I did. I was not comfortable about the idea that nationalism could constitute a single ideology. It has many different forms, and that's what I've tried to... I found when I started doing more intensive reading on nationalism that it took many different forms, and therefore the term nationalism is something of an umbrella. I found exactly the same thing with conservatism and its many different kinds of expression around the world. But the point is that when we take an ideology seriously, we learn to look at its different manifestations and its strengths and its weaknesses, what makes it so appealing. Fascism is immensely appealing to millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, and has been for a very long time. And much the same goes for fundamentalism. What is it about these ranges of ideas, these groupings of ideas that makes them so powerful? On the way, we'll read what people have and listen to and hear what people have said about them or said in expressing them. And that's why we look at particular thinkers. Some thinkers have been much more systematic than others, and that's why we look at particular thinkers. I hope that helps. And I hope you enjoy continuing to read and follow what's happening in the world around, because that does express ideologies. Okay? Jatin, you've said again, thank you, sir, the way you speak can make a person conservative one week and a liberal the next. It's very interesting you should say that. A German colleague of mine who visits IIT Madras and other institutions every year, and I teach at his college, which is an outlying campus of the Technische Hochschule Koblenz. It's a lovely small campus, 400 meters from the Rhine in summer. It really is a marvelous week's teaching. They have an international week every year, and I've been lucky enough to go along there for about the last 3 or 4 years. Now, my colleague has been sitting in on my lectures here, very kindly and patiently sitting in on my Ideologies lectures, which are running this semester at IIT Madras. And he said exactly the same thing. He does not describe himself as a conservative, but he said after the conservatism lecture, he said, he said it to the class at the end, said to everyone, I've realised I think I'm a conservative. And the following week he thought he might be a liberal, and so on. What I can tell you what I'm trying to do in the lectures and in the book. Trying to analyze and explain major ways of thinking which have had a huge impact on our world and continue to have a huge impact on our world and on our lives. Major policies, major legislation, the shape of entire societies. These are informed by ideologies of various kinds. Sometimes some are dominant, some are not, and some are actually imposed, forced upon us. And we need to see what it is that is so appealing, so powerful, so attractive, and so persuasive about these groupings of ideas, or schemes of ideas in some cases, and what is it about them that sustains them, and what is it about them that perhaps shows they have contradictions in them, that they're not quite as wonderful as they look, or that they might result in unimaginable horrors perpetrated by those of us who believe them. That's happened a very great deal in human history. But I hope you find my expositions of these informative and illuminating and interesting. And if you wish to disagree or find counter-arguments, please put them up. Right? And, I'd love to hear your reasons and your evidence. Now, I hope one of the things I do in the course is convey to you, first of all, how to take an ideology seriously. Look at its main ideas, look at its main expositions, look at its implications and consequences, and look at its applications, is that the right word? Look at its embodiments in practice and see where they have led us. And thereby, I hope we'll all gain a more informed and, I hope, articulated and nuanced understanding of our world. It's not an easy world to live in at any time. And I hope that constitutes some kind of answer or response to your question. Please, of course, let me know if there's anything I say that you find difficult to follow. I'd be happy to try and explicate what I've said or amplify it or express it better. Perhaps some of you can think about this for next time. It's only a suggestion, no more than that. If you read your daily newspapers or get your news on the net, do you find yourself reacting to events in the light of some things you've encountered on the course? I'm not saying you should. It's just a question, a literal question. Do you find that what we've done here leads you, perhaps enables you, if you like, to identify background and other factors in major events? Think, for example, of the impact of anti-discrimination legislation, of how we speak about people. For example, I have a permanent, chronic, and probably worsening disability, which is my eyesight. I'm lucky, but it'll almost certainly get worse as I get older, or get even older. And I have a condition in some of my joints from playing various kinds of sports when I was younger. I wish I'd been better at them. But think about how very seriously IIT Madras is a central government institution. We have to adapt our buildings for people with a very wide range of physical capacities. The idea of being able-bodied may actually be a misleading concept. All of us face issues, for example, walking up stairs. I now have to think about that. Yes, I do. I need to keep certain muscles moving. But suppose we can't actually walk upstairs. And yet, under the law, we as IIT Madras are obliged to make our buildings accessible and our facilities accessible. Think of where, if you take a lift, think of where the buttons are placed. A few years ago, they'd been placed at shoulder height for someone of average height, I don't know, 5'7" or so, 1m65, 67, standing upright. The buttons nowadays are often at the height that is suitable for someone who's in a wheelchair. Think about doorways. How wide are the doorways in your buildings or the buildings you use? Now, we may say, yes, these are liberal conceptions behind the idea of rights of access and so on. We may also say they could be socialistic conceptions and could have to do with our expansion of the sense of human entitlement. Are these two different moral visions? They may well be. Two different ideological visions, they may be. Right? And that's what I hope learning about ideologies will help us to think about. Help us to understand why we bring in these major changes and how we might justify them. Not everyone wants them either. Please remember that also. But time's going by. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Is there anything else you would like to talk about? I hope you found our conversation helpful. It is a conversation. You're talking to me via your keyboards, and I'm responding via the microphone and the camera. Last time we met, 3 weeks ago, some of you asked for a session every fortnight. We couldn't do that at that time, but we can probably do that today fortnight, Wednesday fortnight, which I think may be the 25th of March. I'll keep you informed, or I'll make sure our team keep you informed. Jatin, can I take a week or so to think about your question? Is rationalism guided by charismatic leaders? I'm not sure in what sense you mean the term rationalism. Do you mean in the sort of Michael Oakeshott sense, Michael Oakeshott's very critical about a person he calls the rationalist, who thinks they can have a grand design and improve everything about our lives with some kind of a priori design for society, like having all buildings laid out in a certain way, or all roads laid out in a certain way, or using, as they tried to do after the war in much of the war-destroyed Northern Europe, building these plate glass and concrete estates outside towns, because some of the slums in Europe until the late 30s and until after the war were absolutely terrible. And they found out the hard way that it would probably be better to improve the neighborhoods where people actually live, because they had a sense of place and locality and community and continuity, which a conservative would say, and Oakeshott does say. Yes, there have been people who've had grand ideas for society. Some of them have been undoubtedly, I'm sure, very charismatic. If that's what you mean by rationalism, yes, it's often the case. Think of the people who led the French Revolution. Think of the sort of crusaders, if that's the right word, for certain types of teaching methods in schools, or certain types of prison reform, or certain types of social service. Many of these are rationalist in the Oakeshott sense. And some of the people who've initiated these have been very charismatic. Very compelling people, including people who push things like nuclear power. And it's been said about some of the great scientists who then moved towards nuclear power after the Second World War were very forceful, very charismatic people, often very rationalist. This will solve all our power generation problems or whatever. May have done or may not have done, but yes, they may well have been very charismatic. Rudra Pratap Singh Chauhan, well, one more question I'll try to answer quickly. If a great thinker dies, how does why his, could be hers, ideology follow up? No, these are not stupid questions. Please ask your questions. Please go ahead and ask them. I should try and take all your questions seriously. Good question, I don't know. People's ideas live on. If they speak to us, we shall make something of them. That doesn't mean they meant only one thing. It doesn't mean that there's only one thing to be understood by them. If they are serious ideas, they will address and speak to a great deal in us and a great deal in and about our lives and the organization of human life. And that also goes for great writers, novelists, musicians, painters, and so on. So there's no one formula for how somebody's ideological work will survive after their death, or even if it was intended as ideological. But if they've got good ideas, they will live on, they will last, and they'll continue speaking to us in an unpredictable range of ways, but they will keep speaking to us. I hope that helps. Ajinkya Naik, how is technology shaping the ideological space? Is it just a tool or inherently beneficial for the spread of certain ideologies? Top class question. If I don't get through it now, please bring it up again next time. There's an enormous amount of work around this as to whether technique, or techne as the ancient Greeks called it, techne literally meant an art in classical Greek, is independent of the ways we live. One simple answer, take a look at the technologies that were not adopted. Take a look at the technologies that were discovered, that we use every day. I think non-stick frying pans, non-stick cooking pans are one example. I think the material was discovered in quite another context. I've heard two stories about this. I can't remember them exactly, but have a look. But think also of the connection between our purposes and the reasons we actually devise certain technologies. Now that then means that even the invention and development of technology are dependent on human capacities, human intentions and purposes, and even on the politics of our society at the time. So we would need to come back to this. There is a lot of good writing on this. Some of it is, I'm afraid, very dense. Jürgen Habermas' Knowledge and Human Interests is an example. But there's a lot of fine writing on this. You will find material on the net. Time is running out, and I have to wind up. But it's a very fine question, and do please have a look at it. There's a lot of fine writing on this, on the connection between technology, ideological spaces, and whether technology is itself a kind of ideological space, and whether technology is in any way neutral. Could it be that technology is itself something that we have created, and created in particular contexts and for particular purposes? So there's a lot of fine material. I'll have a look at some of that myself. It's not my main area of work, but it is a significant issue, and I'm looking at some books around this topic. So I hope that helps you to follow up your concerns. And thank you all for being here. I've enjoyed listening to you, and I hope you found what I've said helpful in developing and following up your interests and your concerns. So good evening, everyone. Yes. 1 hour and 2 minutes.